So without any further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce Chief Rabbi Ephraim Mirvis.
I'm absolutely with you there. Thank you for raising it. It's something I continuously think about and strive to achieve. And I think you got it right. We have different paths in terms of religious dogma, which tragically, I think, can't be reconciled. We need to treat each other with respect. And I'll tell you the path that I adopted, because you're all aware that over the decades that have preceded our time, there have been outbreaks of very sad tension between orthodoxy and other strands in this country. So the example I gave was from the cricketing world. I said that we need to be batsmen and not bowlers. We need to be proud of what we are about, to pile on the runs, singles and fours and sixes, to let people know how beautiful our own tradition is, and our aim should not be to bowl any other team out. As a result, I've always said, nobody will ever hear a public condemnation by me or any word of criticism by me against other strands of Judaism. And, you know, we see a weakness in human nature. Sometimes people define themselves not only according to what they are, but also according to what they're not. You find it, for example, in sports circles. If you favour Spurs, then you're anti-Arsenal. If it's City, then you're against United. Why can't we support our own team and wish the others good luck? Right? As long as they don't beat us. And so too, when it comes to religious ideology, why do we have to put ourselves up by pushing others down? If we believe genuinely that we've got the real thing, let's be proud of it. Let's publicize it. Let's tell people how amazing our shul services are, how vibrant our communities are, how successful we are. And then they will respect us and come to us. They won't respect us if we're trying to criticize others and put them down all the time. And that's a weakness of character. So I've always said that. And I want to tell you the good news. I think for the first 1.5 to 2 years of my chief rabbinate, there were articles by various other Jewish religious leaders trying to tear me apart, United Synagogue apart. It hasn't happened recently. Because we've been saying we want to be the batsman, it's now not popular for anybody to be seen as a bowler. And I hope that that continues. So I'm very much with you. There will be issues on which we will continue to disagree and probably have sharp disagreements over. But at the same time, we have to continuously work together and promote Jewish unity. It's actually interesting, I've had a good number of Q&As recently. Okay.
Some people didn't hear the question.
The question is, in a brief way, is should we stay in or should we not? Are we for or against Brexit? Yeah. I must say, in every Q&A I've given during the last 2 months, this question has come up. Right? I spoke in the Young Israel Woodmere Shul in New York on Shabbos. That was the big topic they wanted to talk about. I was in Oxford last week. I spent an entire day in Oxford because of recent developments there. I had 5 different speaking engagements culminating in my address to the Oxford Union. And I met with the Oxford community. This is the question they want to know. Right? And so it's the right question to ask. My answer is, what Judaism says is, go and vote. So thank you very much for cheering, because you've allowed me to answer the question without answering it. Yes.
I'm very encouraged to hear you talk about the leaders, political leaders, feeling well disposed towards Jews. However, there is one political party that is having a little bit of trouble on this issue, and it's the Labour Party. And it's interesting because that used to be the party that was very supportive of Jews once upon a time. Do we think, or do you feel the temperature of the leadership of the Labour Party really being able to resolve their issues with anti-Semitism within the party?
You put the question very well. We're going to be finding it out during the next 2 months. The Shaman Chakrabarti report is going to be prepared. She's going to be taking soundings and hearings and has said that she'll be delivering her report by the end of June. And I think that will be the litmus test. Let's hope that her report will be a thorough one, will be a responsible one, will be a courageous one. And more importantly, let's hope that the party will implement the recommendations of the report. Let's hope they will publish the whole report, because they haven't yet published the Oxford University Labour Club report, which was undertaken by Baroness Royal. Only the executive summary was published. And I think that's going to be the test. Let's hope that the Labour Party will confront whatever issues it might be having in the appropriate way, and won't need our encouragement or criticism in order to do so. Yes, at the back.
While the United Nations is constantly focusing on Israel, with everything going on in the Middle East, and all the human rights defilements going on in the Middle East, and yet constantly they talk about the way Israel is record on human rights and all that kind of thing. That's the rest of the world looks on us as being these wicked people, and it's almost like the United Nations promotes it all the time, because they're forever finding sanctions against Israel for their so-called poor example of human rights.
I agree with you. I think it's symptomatic of a trend that is sweeping through the world, where there is disproportionate attention being paid to Israel. After all, if you consider what has been happening in Syria and the amount of time that is invested in the United Nations and within the world's media on a daily basis to the atrocities in Syria, as opposed to what's happening in Israel, it just actually doesn't make sense. And in fact, anti-Zionism, which equals anti-Semitism, certainly has as one of its features the disproportionate attention being given to Israel in an unfair way. I don't expect everyone in the world to be a supporter of Israel or to say that Israel's right all the time. I do expect them to be fair. That's what I would call on people to do. Be fair. If you're paying a visit to the region, give an equal amount of time within Israel, hear Israeli leaders, hear Israeli people, in addition to being in territories and in other places. If you're writing an article, if you're presenting a report in the media, show fairness, show balance, show different sides of the argument. And if people are fair-minded, then they will have a better grasp of the situation. But what you cited happening in the United Nations and in other forums simply is not fair. And therefore it's coming from somewhere, which is exceptionally disappointing. Yes?
Could it turn round in a kind, I don't mean in a perverse way, but the obsession against Israel, could it be an unconscious expectation that we have to be better?
You're actually right, because we ourselves put ourselves on a pedestal. That is why God fashioned us to be his chosen people. And in fact, the Almighty has guaranteed through all ages that tiny Am Yisrael would always be center stage, and that people would notice us. In whatever country we are an important fabric of those societies, and people always seem to presume that there are far more Jewish people in those countries than there actually are. I had my first exposure to this when, as a child, we used to holiday in Swaziland. Now, how many people have you heard talking about their holidays in Swaziland? Anyway, I'm just going a bit off the subject. But I was brought up in South Africa. My father, being a rabbi, meant that when it came to holiday time, my parents wanted to choose destinations where they were least likely to bump into their congregants. cousin living in Swaziland, in a place called Mbaban. And it was eye-opening for me, holidaying in Swaziland. Now, why am I mentioning this to you? Because in Swaziland at the time, they had one service at the year because there were only 10 Jewish men living in the country. And the only service they had was called Nidra Night in the capital Manzini. And 2 of the people in the minyan were the Israeli ambassador and his deputy, together with 8 other people. But amongst those Jews in Swaziland, there was a Mr. Miller, who was the Minister of Finance in the Swazi government, and there were a few others who were basically running the entire commercial activity of the country. And the Swazi people, because we once paid a visit to King Zabuza III, and he was the king of Swaziland. Some trivial details. And King Zabuza III's grandson is the king now of Swaziland. I think he's married his 114th wife recently. They say you mustn't be crowned Miss Swaziland because that means you'll be the next wife. So why should the Chief Rabbi be talking about all of this? Because King Zabuza said, I am gratified that all the thousands of Jews in Swaziland are so important to the economy of our country, etc. So that was the first taste I had of the impact of Jewish communities wherever we are. And the reason is because we're absolutely dedicated. We're incredibly committed. We become more English than the English. We become more everything than everyone. Because we're so fiercely loyal. We want to make a go of what we are about. And we paid a heavy price for it. Because in Germany, Jews declared Deutschland über alles. And look how we suffered as a result. Our presence is felt. And people do expect more of us. Which I think is good. Because we should be there to set a fine example. But at least be fair when you look to the Jewish people, and not unfair. And I think what we are being confronted by now is a certain level of unfairness. Yes?
One more question. You talk about fairness, and you talked about the Queen of Swaziland. What about the Queen of England? What attempts could you make for the royal family to visit Israel to show solidarity with the community?
Okay, so you've asked about the Queen. Maybe this can be our last question, Cousin Yossi?
Yeah.
Okay. I've become a shtickle expert on the Queen. And I'll tell you about the experiences my wife Valerie and I recently had, only because our experiences don't relate to us personally. It was the honor given to Judaism and the Jewish community. So amongst the various engagements I've had with Her Majesty, the ultimate one came on the 11th of April this year. We were invited to Windsor Castle in order to have dinner with the Queen and Prince Philip and members of the royal family, and to stay overnight in the castle. And this is an annual event. The Queen hosts various dinners and banquets, but once a year she's entitled to choose up to 20 people of her choice to come for dinner and to stay overnight. So there were 19 people on that night, and people from around the world. Just being in the company of her other guests was something extraordinary. And it was absolutely fascinating, because from 6 p.m. until midnight we were constantly in the presence of the Queen and Prince Philip and members of the royal family, including a tour of Windsor Castle given personally by the Queen through the Royal Library, where her chief librarian took out a Sefer Torah that she was presented with in the 1950s, and I opened it and showed the Sefer Torah to Her Majesty. She was deeply interested in that and everything to do with the Jewish people. And don't forget there was breakfast the next morning as well. But why am I saying all this? The genuine affection for Judaism was very palpable. And it's actually really interesting, because Valerie and I were in India in December on an official visit, because India is part of the Commonwealth. And we visited 19 shuls in 5 cities, and the most spectacular shul of all was the ancient shul in Cochin. And when we came to the shul of Cochin, and there are only 7 Jews left in Cochin, right? Amazing people. So the lady who showed us around in that shul said, if you ever see Her Majesty the Queen, she will remember her visit to this synagogue. And she will remember the floor of the synagogue, because the floor is made up of about 1,000 tiles, blue and white, and every tile has been hand-painted and is a work of art in its own right. And you're not allowed to walk around in the shul in your shoes, walk around in our socks, in order not to in any way damage the floor. So Valerie said to this lady, yes, but I'm sure the Queen would have forgotten. She says, no. She was here in the 1990s. She will remember the floor. And she was overwhelmed with it. So when Valerie and I were in Windsor Castle, and it was the first drinks, there were 4 sessions of drinks, and the one banquet, and between some of them you had to go and get dressed into a new outfit, and it was all great. So at the very first session of drinks, when the Queen came over, hello, etc., she said, I want to tell you something interesting about my travels. I was once in India. Do you know the floor of that? And she was speaking about it. Unbelievable. And when we came to the Royal Library, she asked the librarian to take out the gifts that the Jews of Cochin gave her when she visited. And I was really reassured, because we came with gifts for the Queen, 2 gifts, and I was wondering, what's going to happen to our gifts? When will they be thrown out? No, it's all kept. It's all preserved. It's the most remarkable collection. And she asked for it, and out came the memorabilia from Cochin. So I'm telling you all this because I felt it and I saw genuine friendship. And Valerie and I had another experience last week. We were at the Queen's Garden Party. And I don't know if you've ever been to the Queen's Garden Party. So there are 8,000 people there. And we were lucky enough to be invited to be in the Queen's tent. There's the ambassador's tent, there's a general tent, and basically the aim of the game at the Queen's Garden Party is to see Her Majesty. And if you're very, very lucky, she might stop and say hello to you, and then everybody will say to you, what did she say? So we were in the Queen's tent. And again, it's a symbol of connection with the Jewish people. And Valerie's brilliant at networking, and she got to know all the Queen's staff and discuss the kashrus and all that. And the Queen's Garden Party last week was the very first time that kosher food was provided at the garden party for Valerie and myself. Amongst the 8,000 people, we had scones and we had cakes and we had this to look just like all the other. And there was one member of staff who stayed the entire afternoon next to our scones to guarantee that nobody would take it and be available for us. And there was even some soya milk in case we were fleishik, so because they had learnt it all up and they got one of our kosher caterers to cater this for us. And that's the extent of the warmth. And in the Queen's tent, you had the majority of the royal family, plus half the cabinet and a who's who. And you know what the only topic of conversation was? Anti-Semitism. You must be going through a tough time. Isn't it terrible? This shouldn't be happening in our country. We're absolutely with you. Absolutely at one. So that's why I don't say it in an empty way. There is genuine warmth. And now to answer your question. It's not the Queen who decides where she goes. It's the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. And the Queen has stopped making overseas visits. I was very privileged to be on her second last overseas visit when I accompanied her to Belsen, which was a very moving day. And again, a reflection of solidarity with the Jewish people in a very special manner. So
it's just a political decision.
It's a political decision, and I am very hopeful. And now comes the big statement. I am very hopeful that we will see a royal visit in the not too distant future. We are working on it. So should we stop on that happy note?